It is strange how easily almost any socialist writer can lash himself into frenzies of rage against the class to which, by birth or by adoption, he himself almost invariably belongs. And I actually admired these people. I thought, well, that's not very good. I admire them, and I don't share their political views. And then there's these other people with whom I hypothetically share political views, and I don't admire them at all. What's going on? And then I read Road to Wigan Pier, and I thought, oh, that's it. They don't like the poor, they just hate the rich.
Now, The Road to Wigan Pier was Orwell's investigations into working-class living conditions and what he thought was preventing the uptake of socialist political leanings in England. Peterson is right to identify Orwell's distaste for certain elements of the left-leaning intelligentsia. In fact, Orwell was even more scathing than Peterson quotes, saying, "One sometimes gets the impression that the mere words socialism and communism draw towards them with magnetic force every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature cure quack, pacifist and feminist in England." However, the purpose of this is not, as Peterson concludes, to identify why those on the left are incorrect in their assumptions about the world. The reason Orwell was driven to publish Wigan Pier was due to his belief that those who would most benefit from socialism are, instead, opposed to it, identifying both the hypocrisy of individuals within the leftist movement as well as the way it was misconstrued in the public consciousness. What we might today discuss is the difficulty of establishing a counter-hegemonic bloc. It's also important to note that Road to Wigan Pier, published in 1937, was before Orwell has his very own personal experience with fascism. Fighting in the Spanish Civil War profoundly changed Orwell's politics, and he left Spain a convinced revolutionary socialist who regarded the Chamberlain government as a prelude to British fascism and the British Communist Party as a mere mouthpiece of Moscow. Now, there does exist within Orwell's collected works criticism and repudiation of elements of his contemporary leftist counterparts, and the nuance and complexity regarding socialist contradictions and ideological blinkers is identified by Christopher Hitchens. There is, fairly certainly, a divided realization in Orwell's writing that the two things he most valued, which is to say liberty and equality, were not natural allies of each other. A society of free and equal human beings, probably his most oft-repeated statement of his preferred objective, seemed unlikely to emerge from laissez-faire culture, let alone a laissez-faire culture superimposed, as was the Britain of his time, upon a colonial and dirigist one. However, the measures of planning and taxation and regulation required to make the transition could easily and obviously eventuate in an overmighty state with big ideas of its own. There's not much new in this contradiction. Orwell just happened to register it very acutely. This is why he admired the spontaneous fraternity, the other term in the 1789 triad, of the Spanish and Catalan Republican forces. Unfortunately, like much of the right's misappropriation of Orwell's work,
war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. This could be the chants of protesters that we see marching all around the West.
Quite literally. I mean, one of the things that I talk about all the time now is that it's the anti-racists who are the racists.
You're right.
It's based on a reductive understanding of the political spectrum, where criticism of anything popularly believed to be left-wing, in the case of both 1984 and Animal Farm, Stalin's USSR, is seen as an admonishment of everything to the left of babies can be a fuel source, Ayn Rand objectivism. One of the absolutely piercing illustrations of this, in homage to Catalonia, is when Orwell states, "The only unexpected feature in the Spanish situation, and outside Spain it has caused an immense amount of misunderstanding, is that among the parties on the government side, the communists stood not upon the extreme left, but upon the extreme right. In reality, this should cause no surprise, because the tactics of the Communist Party elsewhere, especially in France, have made it clear that official communism must be regarded, at any rate for the time being, as an anti-revolutionary force." This reference to right-wing communism so accurately portrays the practical implications of Stalin's brutal regime while simultaneously drawing out the contradictions within the banal left-right political divide our discourse seems so hopelessly confined to. As previously mentioned, this does present those on the right with some legitimate criticism of the left, although it's rarely used with much integrity or context.
My brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
So while Peterson was right to point out Orwell's disdain for the hypocrisy of petit bourgeois socialists, this didn't make Orwell admire the conservatives within his sphere, as it apparently did for Peterson. Instead, it pushed him further to the left, in forming a radical socialism that has given the English-speaking world some of the greatest works of prose decrying both Stalinism and capitalism. While Peterson has since publishing this video become a darling of both the neoliberal establishment and of the right, it would be unfair to portray Peterson as saying that Orwell was merely a hidden or nascent conservative. Although I think that the conclusion Jordan Peterson draws from Orwell's works are incorrect, he does have this to say about the man himself.
Orwell had sympathy for the working class. He really worked on that his whole life because he was a middle class, upper middle class, snobby type Englishman, and he knew it. And he tried really hard to overcome that. He served in the Spanish Civil War. He wandered around as a tramp. He worked in low-end restaurant. He worked as a low-end worker in restaurants in Paris and in London. He has a very good book. I think it's called Down and Out in Paris and London that describes that. He was a seriously committed dude and really a smart guy.